many of our clients deal with feelings of rejection. And when you begin to believe that you're being rejected by other people, it can start a cycle that just goes round and round and makes those feelings of rejection and what happens in life in those experiences of rejection just increase. So when you see a client who seems to be in that cycle, this diagram is something that can be very helpful. I'm indebted to Victorious Christian Living for the development of this diagram, and I'm excited to be able to share that with you. As you can see, at the beginning of the cycle, a person has a thought or a feeling that they are being rejected or unloved. This is a very common human experience. Ever since the fall of man, sinful people do this to each other. We communicate rejection. We communicate being unloved for a variety of reasons. So it's a common human experience we all have. The key is what you decide about those experiences of rejection. And there are two unhealthy responses to that starts off this negative cycle. The first one is, I am rejectable and unlovable. There is something wrong with me. The reason people treat me this way is because it's who I am. It's what I deserve. And then the second response is, I've been treated unfairly. How dare they treat me this way? I don't deserve this. Kind of an angry response to that. So based on that decision then, there are two different categories of ways that we tend to react. When we take this stance of there's something wrong with me, we tend to do things like withdraw, refuse to take care of ourselves, be clingy or irresponsible, maybe choosing unhealthy relationships, becoming performance-oriented, becoming a rescuer. These are all things that can happen as a result of feeling rejectable and unloved. And then the natural reaction out of this second belief is just to lash out and be angry and controlling. And some of us just vacillate between the two. It's not that we have to choose. Some of us have both of those reactions. But if you look at both of those kinds of reactions, these are not behaviors that draw people to you relationally. These behaviors push people away and in general bring on more rejection. So if you withdraw from everyone, for example, others are likely to conclude, well, you don't want to be with us. So I'm not going to invite you to do anything because you wouldn't come anyway. You want to be alone. Or if it's lashing out, well, who wants to be around someone who's just going to lash out at them? So you're going to just push away from that person. So those are just a couple of examples of how those behaviors that come out of that belief result in then more rejection, which just confirms what you believed and leads to more of those negative reactions. And it's just a nasty cycle that goes on and on. I looked up two different biblical characters who illustrate these two reactions. The first one is a very obscure biblical character named Jephthah. And he was in the unique situation that his mother was a prostitute, but his father actually raised him. And his brothers, the rest of the family, had the mother in the family, and there was no prostitute involved with them. And so they were very downgrading toward Jephthah. They told him, you don't even deserve to be part of this family. You don't deserve any of the inheritance. We don't want anything to do with you. Basically, they just kicked him out of the family. Now, the interesting thing about Jephthah was he actually was a mighty warrior. He had skills. He had some very good things about him, but he struggled with those feelings of rejection because of how he was being treated by his brothers. And his reaction to that, when he got kicked out of the family, it said that he associated himself with a bunch of worthless fellows. So he chose unhealthy relationships. So that's how that part of the cycle looked for him. Then there was Esau, who represents the angry reaction. Esau and Jacob were twins, and Esau actually was the firstborn, and so he had certain privileges that Jacob did not. But one day he came in from hunting and he was just famished, and his brother was making this lovely red lentil stew, and he said, "Give me some of that stew." And Jacob was quite the manipulator, and he said, "Well, give me your inheritance and I'll give you some of my stew." And he's like, "I don't care, just give me the stew." And then later, when it came time for the father's blessing, Jacob deceived him out of receiving the blessing. I won't go into the details. You can read it in Genesis if you want to. But Esau was so angry that he went off and married a woman that was not part of his race, which was a big no-no, and he set out to kill his brother. So Jacob had to flee for his life. Now, if you think those behaviors created warm feelings with his family that made them want to be around him, you have another thought coming. Obviously that pushed people away and brought on even more feelings of rejection. So that's how those two Bible characters fit into this pattern. Now, I want to look at how you can get out of that cycle. And you'll notice that in this diagram, it still begins with experiencing rejection. We can't get away from that in this world. We are going to experience rejection. Everyone, at some level. The key is whether we can forgive the people who have rejected us. It says in Ephesians 4:32, "Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake has forgiven you." Now, doesn't that sound like someone you would love to be around? A tender-hearted, forgiving, loving person? That draws people to you. And once you have forgiven that person that hurt you and rejected you, you no longer have a need to react and protect yourself from that emotional pain because you resolve it through forgiveness. The other step is recognizing and accepting what your true identity is. So now, instead of deciding that you are rejectable and unloved, you decide that you're accepted and loved. And instead of lashing out in anger, you move into gratitude and you focus on how blessed you are. Ephesians 1 has a list of wonderful statements that God makes about how He views us. We're blessed, we're chosen, we're holy, we're blameless, we're loved, we're adopted, we're accepted, we're redeemed, we're forgiven. Those are all aspects of our identity. So let's look at how these two characters, Jephthah and Esau, were able to turn this around. Jephthah had a situation, his brothers ran into a situation where there were several enemies coming against them at the same time. And they knew they didn't have the skills and the resources to win the victory without Jephthah. So they came to him and said, "Will you help us?" And he said, understandably, "Oh, now you want me. Now you want me when you're in trouble." So are you going to respect me? Are you going to take me back into the family if I do this for you? And they assured him they would. And he evidently forgave them because he put his life at risk and he battled those enemies and won the victory. He rose up to who he knew God had created him to be and looked at his true identity. He was a mighty warrior. That's who God made him to be. So he forgave. He remembered who he was, and he was able to get out of that cycle of rejection. With Esau, years after he left, after Jacob had gone to live, fled away and lived with an uncle and had this huge family, and he had to leave, in order to come back home, he had to travel through the land where Esau lived. And Jacob was scared to death. He wrestled with an angel all night before starting on this journey because he knew that he had to conquer this need to control that was within him. And he did that. And when he got to Esau's land, he sent all these gifts ahead to try to appease him. And Esau's reaction was, I don't need any of this. And he embraced him. And he offered to care for him and keep him safe as he was traveling through his land. So somewhere along the way, Esau was able to forgive Jacob. He was able to remember who he really was. I'm your brother. This is what family does. They take care of each other. And in doing so, he was able to be reunited with his brother, and that sense of rejection was broken through for him. So you can see how this cycle is being reversed, because instead of making the decision that you're unloved and rejected, you're looking at who you really are, what your true identity is, and then rather than these negative reactions that bring on more rejection, there's a decision to be kind and forgiving. And these are the things that turn the cycle around. So one of the things that I will often suggest after going through this diagram with a client is that they list out all the people they can think of in their lives who have rejected them, where there's still pain over that. And then to start on a journey of learning to forgive them, knowing that once all those people who have rejected you have been forgiven, there's not that hold that they have over you anymore. You can be free to be who God created you to be. And then it's a focus, it's another great assignment to just look through Ephesians 1 on their own and look for what are the statements God makes about who you are, and trying to internalize those. Another way that I will sometimes explain what happens with this cycle of rejection is what I call rejection glasses. So I have these old glasses that are broken. I dropped them once and the bows broke, so they weren't very quality glasses. And they're not really the right prescription. So when I look through them, what I see is kind of foggy and they're not clean. So what I see is distorted, and then I look kind of strange in them besides. And that is a great illustration of what happens with rejection. It's like we wear these rejection glasses where when I'm convinced that I'm rejected and I look through these rejection glasses, everything I see is rejection. Now, the person who did that thing or whatever may not have intended a negative message at all, but I'm going to see it that way because that's what I'm expecting. And looking at life through that lens is very painful. So if we can take off these glasses through forgiveness, through coming back to what does God think of me, there's a lot of freedom that can come from that.